Today joining me is Rufus Triplett. He's been a lifelong icon of Cleveland, and I'm going to have a discussion with him today, and I look forward to it. He's been a friend of mine for a long time.
It's good to be here. Coming down the hallway.
Rufus mentioned that to Eddie Box, right? Eddie Box.
And I was working with Lloyd Hamilton.
Yeah, but I knew you better through Eddie, I believe. Do you see him anymore?
I do not.
He's living in Athens now.
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, I need to call him this week. I hadn't seen him in a while. We usually get together and eat lunch every so often.
That used to, I wonder why I wasn't seeing him so much.
Yeah. Do you wonder sometimes we run different circles, we don't see people a lot, but I guess we're just different places, aren't we?
We're different places, and Cleveland has grown to the size now that you could go a long time without seeing somebody that maybe you even grew up with.
Yeah. You tend to run certain circles for a while, and then you change and go to the other circles, and you see more people then than you do now, and not a real specific reason, just things change.
I think that's possible. Frankly, I try to be out and about and at least touch base on as many different circles as I can. Obviously, I see a lot of folks at church, but I'm in the Rotary Club, so I see a lot of people there. I go down to the history branch of the library and touch on some other folks there. I'm on the Historic Zoning Commission, so I get to see a lot of different people in that regard.
How many's on that committee? 5 or 6?
There's 6 of us, and it takes 4 to make a quorum.
Oh. I went here a while back. I say a while back, maybe a year ago. Was you on it then? I don't remember.
Mm-hmm. I was.
I just
can't remember the
I
exact
can't remember what it
project
was, but it went through. So.
And then Teresa was down
this
past
last
meeting
week,
about
Teresa
what she's
Evans.
doing with that new property for her.
Yeah. I'd hate to tell her no, wouldn't you? Wouldn't go over well.
Well, sometimes I go into some meetings wondering who I'm going to make mad today, because they're just certain guidelines there, and you have to uphold them. And so that sometimes means people you really like and all having to say no to them.
I was on the planning commission for over 20 years, and I know what you're talking about, because you do have certain guidelines you have to go by, and there's really not any gray areas, and I'm not even sure why they have a board on those things, because it's all pretty well just cut and dry. There's not many ambiguous subjects.
Well, somebody has to uphold whatever those guidelines are, and
I suppose that's it.
And I guess city council or county commission don't have the time to go handle every single thing that's coming along, so they have some of the rest of us to act on their behalf. So.
One of my favorite sayings were, well, it meets all the criteria, and we've got to say yes.
Yes.
Or it doesn't meet their criteria, and we got to say no. So it's pretty simple when you get down to that. It's just a matter of a group saying it meets the criteria. If you didn't, you just have the Wild West.
Oh, yeah. You'd have like some cities in Texas where you've got a really nice mansion and right next door is a huge shopping center. I mean,
yeah. Now, when you were at SunTrust, were you an appraiser or what?
No,
what was
I was in bank operations, Dee, and we handled all of the processing of checks and did a lot of things with the Federal Reserve regulations and training on those. If there was electricity went out at a branch, make sure that everything gets back up and running again, all that kind of thing. And I did that for the Chattanooga region which included Cleveland.
Mm-hmm.
And then they asked me if I would come to Atlanta, and I did bank operations at the corporate level in Atlanta.
How long?
I was down there 6 years.
Did you feel like you were out of touch with Cleveland during that 6 years, or did it just go by like that?
Oh, it somewhat out of touch because you just didn't have day-to-day gathering with folks, contact, and work would just keep you kind of tied down.
Did you live there?
I did.
Did you get a house or apartment?
I got a condo on the Peachtree Street, right close to the Amtrak station, the very southern end of Buckhead. And that was close to work. SunTrust Plaza was right downtown on Peachtree. But it still took 15 or 20 minutes to go that short distance.
Was that close to the that cafeteria? OK, was it OK Cafe?
OK is on the old Highway 41, and it's further up in Buckhead. It's where that Buckhead exit is as you're coming south.
Close to the Varsity? Was that close to the Varsity?
Varsity's right on downtown. This is up at West Paces.
West Paces Ferry, yeah. Mm-hmm. That's it was a good place to eat. I remember that. Mm-hmm.
Still is. They had a fire and they were closed for a couple of years, and they're back open again.
I bet COVID hit them hard, wouldn't you say?
I'd say so. Although for years they had a carry-out service, and all, and that kept going through COVID.
That always reminded me of City Cafe, same sort of menu, like a little bit of everything.
Hey, absolutely.
Now, when you was in Cleveland, was you raised in Cleveland? I know you went to. What did you say you graduated?
64. Lived on Centenary Avenue.
I was -1. You lived. Did your family move to Centenary?
Moved to Centenary. My dad was pastor at Broad Street Church, and we came in '56 when I was 9, corner of Oak and Centenary, and was there till actually I graduated from college. I lived on campus at Tennessee Wesleyan University. Tennessee Wesleyan College back then.
Yeah.
But I would come home and work at Merchants Bank on the weekends. And
who worked there then?
Oh goodness, George Thorogood was president. Bobby Taylor was the executive vice president. Doyle Clark was there. Let's see, Jimmy Goddard, Loyal Broomfield.
I know. Yeah, I know Loyal. Didn't he die, or did he die?
I think maybe he did. He went by the nickname of Bunny.
Yeah. Did you ever listen to his answer machine? It was long. He'd say, "You've reached Loyal Broomfield persistence." It was like 20-minute introduction.
You'd fall asleep. It was interesting. Back in the early '60s when I started at the bank, we didn't have account numbers. We posted everything by name. And one of the tests I had to take to be employed, even though it was part-time, was to how good was I at alphabetizing to get the checks in alphabetical order in order to be able to
Did you go by their last name?
By their last name and then their first. And I would tell programmers that when I was in Atlanta, prior to my even being down there working on projects where we were combining all the different deposit systems into one. The Federal Reserve Bank said you need one system, SunTrust. So I worked on that project. I'd tell programmers that we didn't have account numbers, and they'd look at me like I had two heads. It was just unheard of. But back then, I mean, grocery stores even had drafts. The banks would print up pads of drafts and have them at the grocery store so customers could come in and they'd say, "Where do you bank?" And they'd say, Cleveland National or Merchants, wherever. And they would tear off one of those drafts and they could fill it out to pay for their groceries.
That was like a check?
Like a check, except it was a draft. We did have the transit routing number on the checks, the magnetic ink number.
Yeah.
And that was so checks could be processed.
Even then?
Even then. And then
what about on the drafts? Did they have it?
Well, that kind of killed the drafts because they didn't have the magnetic numbers on those. And of course, they couldn't have the account numbers on them. So.
It's like a counter check. What is a counter check?
A counter check is a check that literally is on the counter at the bank where you can pull it out of fill it out and take it to the teller and look at getting cash.
Well, they wouldn't. I don't even know if they use counter checks anymore, do you?
Well, ATMs pretty much have taken care of that, debit cards.
At the time in the banking business, what was high tech to people then?
Oh, I would say it would be the old Burris Postronic bookkeeping machines where you would post and you'd have dual ledgers and you would post the checks and add the deposits, and then at the end of the month you'd have a stack of these things, and literally we would take a paper cutter and cut them in half. The bank kept one half as its record and sent the other half out with the checks as the statement to the depositor.
That was high tech.
That was high tech. It was the kind of thing, we would send checks that were going long distance to a correspondent bank. Ours happened to be American National in Chattanooga. And then they would process them. They would add them to our account at American, and then they'd send them on to whatever bank they were drawn on across the country. But here locally, every afternoon, we'd add up what checks were going to Cleveland Bank and Trust and what checks were going to Cleveland National. And they'd be doing the same. We'd call the totals to each other, and then we would write a cashier's check for the difference if what they had to give us was more, and we'd balance it all out so that we were giving each other
at the end of every day.
At the end of every day, and then we would meet at the corner of Ocoee and First Street and swap them and take them back. Mid-60s. Mid-60s. We were a little behind the times here, but it was a kinder, gentler time, too.
Well, if you go back 20 years prior to that, was it about the same way?
It'd be about the same way.
I mean, when did they sort of stop having the actual money there? I mean, you watch Gunsmoke, and they had real money in the bank. But
well, there's still real money in the bank, but there's not as much need for it as would have been.
But a bank wouldn't have actual money there, right? It would just be an idea of the money.
Well, no, we had, ones, fives, tens, 20s, hundreds. Even back then, you had $500 and $1,000 bills, and you had coin and all. We've gotten to where so much of the money now is electronic that you don't need as much cash as you did back then.
Does it make you wonder where the money is actually?
Well, a lot of it has always been just on the balance sheets. So, no, that's never quite worried me. As long as I can get to my money to go to the grocery store, I'm good.
If you can almost think about it as points and not really money, because it's not necessarily there. It's just an agreement.
That's taking it a little farther, but I can see where you're coming from on that. But it's interesting. I mean, everything had to be the paper being pushed back then.
Yeah.
And then we finally get into the 90s and early 2000s, and the Fed started taking the pictures of checks.
I remember that, yeah.
And only sending the image of the check forward. And then the individual banks started doing the same thing. And it eliminated what was called float.
Right.
And that was
Kiting.
kiting. Virtually now, with the way everything passes electronically, kiting would be very hard today.
They would
I
just
won't
go
say impossible, but very hard.
and it would be somebody would probably catch it.
That was one of my jobs at American National in Chattanooga, was catching kiters.
What would
and being
detect a
traditional.
kiter to a banker? This money keeps coming.
The amount of money coming in, the amount of money going out is virtually the same, and it's building up balances, and so you're creating false balances. As you see, if picture a kite, it's going higher and higher, so the balances are going higher and higher.
And there has to be a day of reckoning.
It has to be a day of reckoning.
Those people that do that, are they just struggling to just make it, or are they hoping for some luck?
It can run the gamut. You've got some folks that are just doing it to get a little grace period. They don't really do they would be what I would call playing the float.
Sure, yeah.
The kiter is exploiting the float. Is again building up those false balances and all, and they look like they're doing so much better than they actually are.
Right.
It's a house of cards, and eventually that falls, and it's, usually the bank who first catches it comes out okay.
Yeah.
And the others that might be involved, they're going to look at suffering a loss. But again, that's virtually been eliminated now.
Yeah, and that's a whole lot. People are a whole lot safer with it. That not think, because that could mess a bank up if it got really big.
There were some banks that went under because of kites.
Golly, that's serious.
That's serious.
When you went to Tennessee Wesleyan, did Glenn Ramsey go there then? Or Zane Harris?
Those two names don't ring a bell with me. Jeff Morlock was there the first 2 years, my freshman and sophomore year, and then he transferred to the University of Georgia. Johnny Simmons,
I remember John,
here, was up there and was my roommate my freshman year.
Oh, John was?
Let's see.
I knew him real well.
Well, there were other folks. Yeah, he was the spearhead behind the veterans home.
I remember Brackett Hooper.
I do.
Well, him and Brackett, we used to all eat lunch together, and Brackett would, he'd get on high horses sometimes. And John came in one day and he said, do we have to fight that war again today? Because that's what John talked about was the war. But he used more colorful language, Brackett did.
A few concise words that you wouldn't use here.
Let me tell you about Capstar Bank. They're located in Nashville, Hendersonville, Gallatin, Athens, Madisonville, Sweetwater, Etowah, and in Cleveland at 950 25th Street and 3855 North Ocoee Street. I've used them. I like them. Give them a try. They're no problem. You said you came here to Cleveland when you was 9. Where did y'all migrate from?
Well, my dad was a Methodist minister, so it's where the bishop would send us. We were in Murfreesboro before coming here. Moved there when I guess I was about a year old, and we were there 8 years. So that's how that worked out. And then we were here 12 years. When I graduated from Tennessee Wesleyan in 1968, I got a job with American National in Chattanooga, and the bishop moved my parents to Johnson City to Muncie Memorial Methodist Church up there. So,
but did you stay, or what did you do? You just stayed in Chattanooga because you were working there, right?
Right. Well, of course, I was living here in the parsonage, and they were going north, and so I had to find a place in Chattanooga to go and live. So that's.
Did you graduate in banking?
It was business administration.
Oh.
Later on, I went to the School of Bank Operations at the University of Wisconsin. It was a school specifically for bank operations people. And it was a 3-year course of study, 2 weeks on campus in Madison, and then a lot of correspondent work in between. So,
Now John had gone to the Army. Had you gone to the Army?
no, because of being in school and whatever, I escaped that. So.
I guess John went after Tennessee Western, I guess, wouldn't you say? Or
He would probably our sophomore or junior year, he went into the Army.
So. Wonder if he was in the reserves or what. I remember I think he was over in Vietnam.
No, he went straight and was fairly quickly in Nam. Jeff was Morlock, went through college, and then a good part of his time was in Thailand. But still connected with that Vietnam conflict.
How did you end up roommates with John? Was that just the draw, or did you know him?
Sheer luck.
Did you know him from Cleveland?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we played together as kids, and he lived over on Brown Avenue, not too far away. So all of us, were neighborhood kids, and we knew each other.
Did you go to Arnold or what?
Went to Arnold, and then went through 8th grade at Arnold, and then 9th grade started at Bradley.
Which was Ocoee Middle School, I guess.
Which is where Ocoee Middle School is now. Yeah.
And so y'all were in the same group.
Yeah.
And Teresa was in that class also?
Teresa was in there with us, yeah.
Who was somebody else?
Keys Philauer, Bob Johnson, Rodney Fitzgerald, Sally Standifer Russell, Tricia White Foy. The list could go on and on.
It's interesting to know that people that graduated with people and you don't even really know that they know each other, but the reality is they graduated at the same time.
Yeah.
It was smaller classes then too, right?
They were. Sheridan Randolph was in our class. And of course, a year or two ahead of us, Dr. Bill Johnson, Steve Sloan. It's just back then everybody knew everybody else, and grades levels made a difference, but not that much.
As you get older, you don't remember if you graduated with them or if they were a year ahead of you or behind. You're not. That's the way I am. Of course, I went to a bigger school, so Bradley was bigger then. I guess 2,000 people.
Well, Bradley was about that size when I was there, but it was really the only game in town. Cleveland High was just getting formed and just getting started, so it hadn't even had a graduating class by the time I graduated Bradley.
Well, in 1964, would there have been a lot of people that would drop out? Wasn't that a sort of a thing more so than it is now? Or?
I think so, and there were clearly two different tracks. There were those that were more on a technical track versus a collegiate track, but I think all of us got along well together and understood that we were all here for a purpose, and we were all trying to prepare ourselves for what life was to bring.
So you're not related to any triplets around here like Johnny Triplett or David Triplett or?
David and I have talked about that. We're probably distant cousins. The triplets in Bradley County came out of Wilkes County, North Carolina, and so did my great-grandfather. But instead of moving to Bradley County, he moved to Anderson County, to Oliver Springs, Tennessee. And, in every family you've got things that are more interesting than others. My great-grandfather Triplett had 24 kids.
24 kids? God, same wife?
No, 2 wives. First wife in North Carolina, and this is the suspect part. Supposedly he just walked away from that entire
God.
set and came across the mountain, married here in Tennessee, and had 12 more kids.
Golly, that guy was brutal, wasn't he?
Well, there was no television or radio. I mean,
What else you gonna do, right?
yeah. And it was economic times. You had big families to be able to run a large farm.
And I guess birth control wasn't as back then.
No, not as prevalent.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know. So anyway, my grandfather was the youngest of the second set of children, and he went into the Methodist ministry after having served in the Spanish-American War in the Philippines, the Philippine insurrection. He was, back then, chaplains fought just like everybody else. They carried a weapon and fought. And the chaplain of the 1st Tennessee Regiment was killed in action, and the regiment elected my grandfather to be chaplain. So he finished that, came back, went to divinity school at Vanderbilt, and then did missionary work as well as holding churches for the Methodist Episcopal Church South. And he went out to Spokane, Washington, prior to marrying my grandmother, and started a Methodist church out there. That was still wild and woolly country out there. And then he went to, just after he married, he went to Oklahoma City and started an ME Church South there. In fact, my dad was born in Oklahoma City, and then came back. Her family, her parents were aging by that time, and they needed to be nearby to help them. So the bishop appointed my grandfather to congregations in and around Chattanooga. And then he died early. My dad was only 18 when my grandfather died. And Dad then went into, he went to Hiawassee College and then to Emory and Henry College and then on to Emory University, to the Candler School of Theology, and became a minister. So,
You're from a big line of educated people.
yes.
Wonder why that is. Wonder what the reason for that is.
I think part of it is they saw that as a way of moving forward. Did they want to be totally on the farm? Did they see that industrialization was coming and that it was harder to make a living in this part of the country and in agriculture?
And maybe they didn't have big farms to inherit.
No, they
so
didn't.
They didn't have the option of,
Right.
You know, that might have been why a lot of people went into more technical stuff, because they didn't have the option of, well, I'm going to inherit the dairy farm.
First, said, the older brother's going to get the dairy farm.
Yeah. Or already has it by then if you've
Right.
got 24 kids.
Right.
The Methodists were real big around here. They were the ones that set up a lot of churches around the Indians, around the Cherokee Indians, and they were real big in trying to, I guess, convert.
Right. Well, the official date for the removal of the Cherokees, 1838, but for instance, Broad Street Methodist was founded in 1837. It was right in that transition period when more white people were coming in or intermarrying maybe with the Cherokee.
But why the Methodist church? Why not the Baptist or the?
Well, the Baptists were active. I mean, Jesse Bushyhead, who was a Cherokee chief and led one of the parties going west, was a Baptist minister, ordained Baptist minister. So they were Baptists in here, but the Methodists and the Presbyterians were probably the most prominent in Upper East Tennessee in the very early days.
Now,
and then that came on down into Lower East Tennessee.
I guess the fact that a lot of the white man was marrying the Cherokee and the women had the property, So they wanted them to go to their churches,
Churches,
I guess.
yeah.
Just as simple as that.
Well, my wife's second great grandfather, C.L. Hardwick, was born at the Indian Agency in Charleston on Valentine's Day in 1827, February 14th. His grandfather, Hugh Montgomery, was the last Indian agent to the Cherokee Nation here in the East.
Now, wasn't that who is the John Ross? Not John Ross. Am I thinking Ross's Landing?
Ross's
Chief
Landing,
Ross.
that was Chief John Ross.
He was an agent, right?
No, he was principal chief of the Cherokee Nation, but he was not a federal government agent to the Cherokee.
Oh, okay, I see. So, C.L. Hardwick was born
At the Indian Agency.
in Charleston.
No,
His mother was Indian or what?
No. Hugh Montgomery was appointed by President Jackson to take Governor McMinn's place when he died. McMinn was agent to the Cherokee. And Hugh was a prominent Georgia family, Hugh Montgomery. And Montgomery Ferry in Atlanta, Montgomery Ferry Road and all that, the same family. And so Hugh was sent to be the agent. He was the one who would give passports for people to come from what's now McMinn County into the Cherokee Nation, and handled a number of things. But his daughter, Jane, married John Wesley Hardwick, who had come to the Indian Agency to be an assistant. He had been appointed to be an assistant to Hugh Montgomery. Mm-hmm. And John Wesley Hardwick and Jane Montgomery fell in love and married. And they had C.L. and a number of other children. But C.L. was born there in 1827.
And C.L. was the one that started Hardwick.
Started Hardwick Stove and Hardwick Woolen Mill. Also Hardwick Bank and Trust in Dalton, and there was a Hardwick Bank in Summerville, Georgia.
Where does Captain Rott fit in that? Are you familiar with him?
Captain Rott, he came just prior to the Civil War from Germany. He was hired by the mines in Ducktown to be manager of one of the mines, and later became manager of all of them. But he was pretty enterprising and got the rights to run the commissary. Mm-hmm. And the closest city, town with financial backing for all of that was Cleveland. And of course, the railroad coming through here created the need for the copper road to be the shortest way to get the copper from the mountains out to the people that wanted to buy it.
Some think that Rott brought the railroad here.
No, the railroad was Thomas Howard Callaway was president of the East Tennessee and Georgia Railroad, and then later the East Tennessee and Virginia. Because the railroad got here, that was the reason for Rott to look at building the copper road to be able to get that copper here. Prior to that, they went down through the mountains to Dalton to reach the railroad. It's a longer path.
Now, I read the book on Rott, and mm-hmm. it's a little bit. It says a little bit different. Of course, it's a little controversial about whether or not. Supposedly, he brought the 64, or what we call 64 highway, in, and that's why they brought the railroad here, because he lobbied the railroad people, and I believe he was a big stockholder in the Hardwick Bank.
Well, he started Cleveland National Bank. He was the...
So it was a different bank.
It was a different bank.
I see.
Yeah, some of those things from back then, Dee, I can't say that you're wrong.
And who knows that the book's right?
Right.
Now, when you say...
But they all worked with each other.
Well, it's
Rod
like
and Hardwick and
Callaway.
Callaway, and
Callaway was a big name here, but so was Rod.
Rod though got his real founding and all in Copper Hill in Ducktown, but
And migrated here.
migrated here. What's called the Rot House now, east of the railroad, that was built by Thomas Howard Callaway.
Correct,
Had 2,000 acres with it, and Callaway sold that 2,000 acres and that house to Rot, and that was where he set up his operation here at this end of the Copper Road, to oversee the ingots and all being loaded on the trains. And then for a while during the Civil War, they had a rolling mill here that Rot was instrumental in founding. And they brought the ingots down from Copper Hill and they rolled them out into sheets that could be used then by the Confederate arsenals to make the caps, firing caps for the muskets.
And he was known as a they were going to try him for a terrorist, right? Or because he was he was selling the.
Well, basically the Confederacy, 90% of the copper they used during the Civil War effort came from Copper Hill in Ducktown. And Rot, being the manager of those, basically was by military decree of the Confederate government working for them.
Yeah.
Evidently, he was able to convince the federal general who was here in the Chattanooga area and here in Cleveland that he was kind of coerced into doing that.
Yeah.
And he actually got a pass that allowed him to take his family to Cincinnati, where there were a lot of other German immigrants. So he sat out the last part of the war in Ohio, and then came back, reopened the mines. And it's amazing they were able to sell 1 million pounds of copper the first year he came back. So clearly he had been able to hide some copper away up there in the mines. Yeah.
It was that the Rot story is something to be told if somebody could know the actual everything.
Yeah.
Now, when you say you go down to the historical library, that's across the street, right?
Across the street from the main library. Yeah. It's in what the house that Pleasant Craig Mouse built right after the Civil War.
What me and you'd call the old library, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Did you go there as a kid?
Oh yeah.
Did you ever go to story time when they read the storybook?
Mm-hmm.
I did that.
That was fun.
Well, those days are over, aren't they?
They are that. And you would come in that front door and there were nothing but bookshelves down that long hallway.
The bathroom was on the right, if I remember. And you walked around that room to where you could sit and they'd read that story.
Yeah.
I always went with my grandmother and she didn't want to stay and listen to the story, and I wanted to always stay and listen to the story. Isn't that weird, the things you remember?
Right.
Why do I remember that?
Yeah. Well, it was a good time for all of us. You know, it was different from the regular day to day.
Do you think that things are just different now or worse, would you say, as far as?
Oh, I think everything is always evolving. Wouldn't it be dull if we were still doing things the way they had to do them in the 1870s and 80s? Or
talking about those checks?
Yeah.
You couldn't do that today. There's too many people.
No.
Is there more people in the United States now than there were then? Like twice as many, or?
Oh, I don't know what the multiplier would be, but it's certainly several times over.
Some claim that we're getting a decrease in population because the baby boomers are getting older. Abortion's more easily obtained. Contraceptives, immigration laws.
Well, we could talk for hours on immigration law,
Yeah,
but there's just a reluctance. People are having children later.
that's true.
Uh,
And less. They don't have. If you
so
said a guy had 24 kids today, they'd have him on Fox News tonight.
probably so. Put him in a carnival.
And that was probably not all that unusual then, was it? I mean, it was
No.
unusual, but not.
Not terribly. For instance, on my mother's side, my grandfather was one of 8 siblings, and my grandmother was one of 8.
That was sort
that
of
was a norm
yeah.
in families.
Now it's 2, right? Was you
2 to 4, just depending. More likely 2.
Yeah. And that's that's a trend that's gonna go down, I guess.
Yeah. I will go as far, Dee, on immigration as saying something's got to be done about immigration. And the members of Congress need to get on their big boy and big girl pants. They're not going to make everybody happy.
Nope.
They just need to come up and say, this is what works, this is what doesn't work, and we're going to change the law to be this so we can control and allow people to come in and work agricultural jobs or whatever jobs, have a path to citizenship.
A path to citizenship.
And
a clear path.
A clear path. And, they're not going to make everybody happy, so they just need to sit down and do their job.
Well, and I'm not against immigration. I think we need help and all that other stuff. But I know a lot of them. They don't know what to do to come here or to be legal, or they don't even know. If they don't know, I sure don't know.
Yeah.
So I mean, there needs to be a book where if I get a contractor's license or a driver's license, I can look up and see what I need to do, and I can meet that criteria and get it or not. And they need to have that same thing.
It needs to have that clarity.
I think that we should say, let's say that they need to have somebody. I guess it's the jobs report or something. And if we're low on workers, allow more in. This year we're going to allow this many in because says that we're this low on workers, and let that be the judge of who comes in based on other criteria, because we need help.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, I don't know of any restaurant that wouldn't take 10 workers tomorrow.
Oh, absolutely. But we also need the diversity that immigration brings.
We need it. We need it bad. That's how we got here.
Yeah, it's a melting pot. Mm-hmm. And we need to embrace that. Now, I think we've got to be very careful. There are good eggs and there are bad eggs, whether they were born here or they're coming across the border, and you just got to have some way to sort them out.
Well, and when you say good eggs or bad eggs, now we've got to determine what's good and bad. So that gets a little...
That's another slippery slope.
But you got to say crime or not crime. If somebody's been arrested 5 times in another country, we don't need to let them in here.
Or they have been deported and here they come back with a criminal record.
But if they're over here trying to go to Tennessee Wesleyan, man, help them out.
Yeah.
Give them a hand.
Exactly.
I need them.
Exactly.
On the courthouse square at 30 2nd Street is the law firm of Logan Thompson Law. Since 1965, they have served the legal needs for the good citizens of Cleveland-Bradley County. If you've got a problem, they're no problem. Give them a call. Have you ever seen times when things were so messed up in our government, or is this just, it's always similar to this?
Oh, I think determining what's messed up is kind of subjective.
That's another, yeah.
And I'm sure there were people that thought everything was going to hell in a handbasket in the 1850s. And
In the
you know,
1960s,
60s,
I mean, Elvis, he wasn't allowed on TV.
maybe, and you know, so it changes
It's
from time.
always. Yeah, I'd say that back in the 1830s, there were people agreed and disagreed with the treaties against the Indians and all of that stuff. There was always disagreements.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
It's always been a thing. It's not any different today. It's just a different thing, I guess.
Yeah, it's just again things evolve and they come along. So
You know, they also say that, you know, we don't need presidents over a certain age. I think we don't need presidents under a certain age because with age comes experience. And,
right, the Constitution covers that. Have to be at least 35.
right? And that's awful young. I mean, I'd hate to think I was running the country when I was 35.
Take it in context. People at 35 or 40 were pretty old when the
true.
Constitution was
That's
written.
true. Or more mature.
More mature.
More mature.
But the death rate was higher at an early age back then.
What was the average life expectancy then?
Oh goodness, Dee,
55 maybe?
I couldn't.
I'd been dead.
Probably 55. Yeah. It's very unusual to live into your 70s or 80s.
I got a guy that works for me. He's 92. And, I mean, he doesn't work 12 hours a day, but he'll work 6, 5 days a week. He just got back from a 30-day trip to Colorado or something he goes on every year, and I saw him driving down the road today. It looked like he was cleaning out his flower beds because he was hauling some garbage.
And he's a darn good worker.
Yeah, do you think that plays a part in it? I mean, it seems to me like the harder you work, and I don't mean playing golf or tennis, I mean the people that seem to be the harder working at a job seem to be the most balanced mentally to me.
That's
As a rule.
as a rule, they have something that gives them purpose and gives them something to be tied to, and have a reason for being, and that keeps them level and keeps them justified. You know, the secret to retirement is not what you're retiring from, but what you're retiring to. I saw so many people who worked at the bank, and the bank was the only thing they ever did. And they would retire, and within a year they were gone because they didn't have anything that gave them any kind of interest to be able to feel like they were accomplishing anything.
And I think you're using the word accomplishing things is the right word. It's not just staying busy. It's actually accomplishing something. If nothing else, trick your mind into thinking this is important.
No, a hobby.
Well, but wouldn't you? I think you have to. I think it's maybe more in not just hobbies, but something that you think is bettering stuff, like not just playing golf 5 days a week, but you know, you're on these boards.
Right.
You know, that's
Giving back.
You probably read up on the stuff. I'm guessing that you're the type that kind of reads up on what's coming and what the new rules are a little more than just go and spend the hour
And take up the space.
Yeah. So I think I always thought to myself that you know, achieving something is better than having pleasures. Like happiness is in victories, not in pleasures.
Well, all work and no play makes for a dull boy. So I think you've got to weigh it. You've got to be doing things like being on the boards and giving back, but you need to give yourself recreation time, or if you like to travel, to just pick up and go, spending time with family, helping family members as
Well,
they're
is
coming
that
along.
may be working, helping the family members.
Well, it's more
You're helping them work.
It's more pleasurable than sitting
Yeah.
behind a desk.
Right. But what I'm saying is, I guess what I'm asking is, do you feel like you're in the total retirement mode, or are you looking for the next chapter?
Oh, I'm always looking ahead, Dee. I mean, just my nature is the way I was raised, that you're here to help others and you're here to do what you can to make your church or your city or your county successful.
What did your parents do that made you that way?
Oh, my dad was always giving, Dee. He was always involved in the community, and even helping members of other churches if they asked him to come be with a family member who was ill, and all, to go and visit and pray with them and whatever. Dad was very involved with Kiwanis Club here. He was president one year. He was very involved with the Salvation Army, not only here but in Johnson City, and up there he was president of Salvation Army. So, giving back and being involved was just something that comes naturally.
Was he doing it because he thought it was a religious thing, or did he want to, or did he feel?
I think it was all of the above. It was all of the above. I had an interesting story told me by a lady in Athens when I was in school up there. My grandfather Triplett had been pastor of what's now Keith Memorial Church. Back then it was First Methodist Church, Athens. And evidently he made a house call one day, and she was having difficulty with a coal-burning stove, wanting to try to clean the pipe, and he just took off his coat and helped dismantle the flue and clean it all out, even though he was in a suit and all, put it all back together.
That is dusty.
Put it all back together because she needed help.
Was your mother that way?
Mother was always involved in things at the church, and all. And then later on, after my dad passed away, she came back and worked for Lee Walls at Cleveland Newspapers, Inc. And then after that was involved in new customer solicitation for Merchants Bank, and then went down to Chattanooga and did that for First Centenary United Methodist Church, membership cultivation. So she was always involved.
You were one of the first ones that didn't have a career in serving, other than you were working at a bank
Well, Scotty Probasco would say that banking was a service, that we're there to serve others. So in its own way, it was different, but it was serving.
Well, Probasco, that's the guy that, is that the developer, Probasco?
Well, Ben is a developer in Chattanooga, his son. Scotty was Scotty L. Probasco Jr., and he was vice chairman of the board of American National.
Yeah, I remember that, and that's an odd name, isn't it, Probasco? You don't forget it.
No, it's unusual.
When you went to Chattanooga, did you drive back here to Broad Street Methodist, or did you go to church there?
No, I transferred to membership down there.
When did you? But you transferred back to Broad Street after a few years, I guess.
Well, when we moved back after I retired in Atlanta, we redid the house at 590 North Ocoee Street, and when we moved back in 2011, that's when I rejoined Broad Street.
You've been going there about your whole life, off and on.
Off and on.
Does it feel comfortable for you?
It does.
Feel at home?
In fact, I've got to go to a church meeting here in a little while.
Do y'all have church Sunday evening service or just?
This is a congregational meeting tonight, so it's a little unusual.
Does Lionel go there? What does he do?
Lionel is in charge of all of our operations, the cleaning and setting things up and just making sure everything works right.
Good morning, good morning.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. Well, actually, it's morning, morning, morning.
I'd like to get him on my show. I just don't know his contact. I don't know how to go about it.
Well, we can help you there. I can't speak for him as to whether that'd be something he'd be comfortable doing.
He would be good, wouldn't he? He's always in a good mood.
Oh, yeah.
Very upbeat.
Mm-hmm. Very upbeat.
What would have been a typical Friday night when you were 17 years old in Cleveland, Tennessee?
Well, Friday night was football night, so if there was a game at Jimmy Lovell Field, that's where you would be. And Teresa and some of the rest of us were in the band, so we were going to be there regardless.
Teresa was in the band?
She was in the band.
What'd she play?
She was played the flute.
I bet she was good. She's good at whatever she does,
Yes,
isn't she?
she is that. I played the trombone, and I wouldn't even attempt to do that today. My embouchure is shot.
Do you sing?
I do.
What do you sing?
Oh, goodness. The pipes aren't what they used to be, but I've done Broadway shows at the Little Theater in Chattanooga. I've done some opera with Chattanooga Symphony Opera.
You sing some opera?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Who's that famous opera singer?
Well, there's Pavarotti.
Pavarotti, yeah.
Famous tenor.
Yeah.
But
can you understand the opera? I mean,
I can. It's telling a story. It's a little intimidating to a lot of folks because most of the time it's done in a foreign language, but that's the language which it was written in, and the population it was written for. So,
was that Italian?
Italian. There's some are in German, a few in French.
So it's a singing story.
It is.
So that would have been like what? When did they start doing opera? That's when they wear those little glasses, right? They look down.
Oh, you're talking the early 1700s on. Mozart wrote some opera. Handel wrote opera.
What about Vivaldi?
Vivaldi.
Vivaldi. He wasn't quite opera.
He wasn't quite opera. He did oratorio and all, which is similar, but that's church music specifically.
They were more Baroque type music.
Mm-hmm. And then the opera came out of the Baroque. It was the next kind of
opera
step.
Came out of Baroque.
And then, telling a story with music and all finally led to Broadway.
To musicals. I guess, yeah. Just a different singing
Opera
type.
was the musical of the European aristocracy. To them,
prior to Baroque.
Well, it was after Baroque.
Oh, after Baroque.
Yeah. But it's
what was it before Baroque?
Well, you get back into chants, the church music, and then it evolved to where they were building music to be used in church and or for the entertainment of the aristocracy of the day, the royalty of the day. And then that evolved into like opera and all, which had more people involved, and it's grown to be a popular.
Prior to all of that, I guess it was just folk music or chanting. Did you say chanting was
chanting? Mm-hmm. Chants in monasteries and churches and all.
Like on Monty Python, that's when they're chanting and they're hitting their heads with that book. They were chanting.
Well, they were making fun of chanting. But it's interesting. Gershwin wrote, of course, a lot of music, but he wrote what many considered to be an opera, Porgy and Bess, although it's, performed as like a Broadway show. Mm-hmm. So it, and there's some folks who do operas. Let's see what. I'm having one of those senior moments, Dee. I'm not thinking of the name of this modern Susanna, the opera Susanna. It's based on a biblical text, but it was written in the 50s, 1950s. So,
wonder what text it's based on.
There is a book, not in the current official Bible, but a biblical text of the same era as a lot of the other biblical texts, the Book of Susanna, and that's what that opera is based on.
I've never heard about that book.
So
it didn't make it, I guess, right?
It didn't make the official cut. But again, look that up and take a look at it, and then
I will
look up the.
As soon as you leave, I'm gonna look that up because I get interested in that kind of stuff.
Have you been to the Pie Center? I'll ask you a question.
Oh yeah, I'm doing a small job over there, so I'm familiar with it.
We were pleased to go to go through it, and there's a set of statues there in what they call the core. It's C.L. Hardwick and S.B. Reimer Sr. and Mr. Grover Brown, early industrialists here. And then a number of the families, the Reimers and the Browns and the Jacksons and Hardwicks and all have looked at endowing classrooms at the Pie Center in the core. But we're just very lucky to have that. We were talking earlier about college path or technical path. I think we're absolutely doing the right thing here of having the career path for people to be able to learn how to support manufacturing and industry here.
And themselves in some sense.
And themselves in the process. It's not totally necessary to have a college degree to have a very good life in living.
I didn't have one. I went for a day and a half.
Said this isn't for me.
That isn't for me. The line, I would have gone longer, but the line to check in was too long. I just left. I couldn't stand it. I thought, what are they going to do for me?
I understand, but we are giving people the education and how to do that's going to help all of us in this whole region.
There's a lack of, I don't know if and maybe I'm just talking off the top of my head, but do you know of many 20-year-olds that could change the oil in their car? And I'm not saying that the cars are more difficult now, because that wouldn't have mattered. We would have figured it out too, or change a tire.
Yeah, that's.
There's a lack of hands-on, I guess you'd say, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, used to on Saturdays, everybody's Saturday, they mowed their yard, they washed their car, and then they did something else, right? Because that was always, the Saturday was evolved around that. Because your car would rust. It wasn't like they just wanted to keep it neat and clean.
No, it was a matter of preserving it.
Yeah. Nowadays it really wouldn't matter because, plastic stuff on them. But back then it was a real... So I don't know. It's almost like we're raising a bunch of sissies.
Well, I don't know that I would go that far, Dee. I think we're gotten to the place where we're saying, and some people are saying to themselves, I'm meant to do something else. I'm meant to use my head rather than my hands. Um, I'm meant to be in the lab researching and finding ways to help mankind.
But let me ask
and then there are others that they are changing the oil. They are doing all of the work that needs to be done, and all work is honorable.
That's exactly right. That's for sure. But if you study some of these or look into some of this artificial intelligence and see what they're doing with robots today and how they're answering questions when you ask them, it's like you type into your phone and you ask Google something and it gives you an answer. They're having these robots that are doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there will be a day that they'll be able to walk in and sit down on this chair and have a conversation with me and you. I really believe that.
That's that, and you see it on assembly lines.
Yeah, and
right now,
because
they can do it all day long and all night long and never miss a beat. Where you
don't have to have insurance on it. They're not going to sexually harass anybody. They're not going to sue you for.
Well, there are only so many hours in a day that we can really be productive and be, safety conscious.
Maybe robotics is the big thing that you would get into if I was young and had a mechanical brain, I would get into robotics.
That would be a good one, but I mean, we need the researchers to be looking at, we've learned very well, just having passed through COVID, that there's always something new evolving out of a previous disease or virus, and we've got to constantly be looking out and learning about those things and finding a way to treat them.
That goes back to your diversity idea. As we sit and talk about these issues and stuff, and there'll be a young guy in a garage somewhere, and he's coming out with a new solar panel that beats all these other solar panels. Mm-hmm. And then we start going that route.
Right.
And so that you get that through diversity.
You get that, and then you're also, some of these solar panels are going to wear out, and how do we dismantle them? How do we keep them from being...
Well, it's a funny thing that you mentioned that. I was reading yesterday where they have, they say that these solar panels and parts can't be reused, and that's one of the downsides. Well, some guys come up, according to Google 2 days ago, they've determined a way to recycle them. So here we go. We've already solved this issue.
But somebody had, like that fellow, had to be thinking about that and coming up with a way to do it, rather than just digging a hole and just dumping them in the ground.
Max Ehrhart, did you ever know him?
I did.
He was a good friend of mine. He said necessity was the mother of invention. He said if you need something bad, somebody will figure out how to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
So do you look forward to the next 20 years?
Well, I certainly hope so, if I keep my faculties. If I'm just going to be sitting in a chair not knowing what I'm doing, no, I wouldn't look forward to that.
Now 30 years ago, they'd been worried more about the health, but now people are worried more about not necessarily their health, but their mental faculties more than, because they can give you something to keep you alive. How do they keep this brain going?
That was the joke in our family, that on my dad's side, everybody kept their mental faculties, but they died young.
Yeah.
And on my mother's side, they lived forever and lost theirs, So.
Do you know anybody that's had the Alzheimer's or dementia? They got all kinds of terms for them now, but Is that where
Well,
you?
we used to call it hardening of the arteries way back.
Yeah, well, is that the same thing?
I think in many
Or is
cases,
it? Or do they even have that term anymore?
I don't think they
Wonder
use
what
that
they
term.
called it 100 years ago.
Well, that's about when they came up with hardening of the arteries.
What did they call it for that? Just, or did they even notice, or say had been?
I'm giving you a flip answer now. Gaga.
I guess it's because it said, man, he's gone crazy.
Yeah. But it's I'm looking forward to the next 20 years if I can be somewhat mobile and be able to have my faculties and
Well, if something happens, it's going to have to happen fast because you look good, you walk good, you're nothing wrong with you. You do any exercising?
Not as much as I should. I ride the bike some, play golf.
Where do you ride bike?
Ride on the Greenway. We go out sometimes to Bigsby Creek, go up into McMinn County, sometimes start there.
Who do you ride with?
Well, my wife and I ride. We might ride with Doug and Mary Lou Calloway and a number of other folks.
See, I ride road bikes too.
And
what would you ride? Would you ride 20 miles a week or 50?
Oh, every week? No. Jane's more into the riding than I am, but when I do go out, it's going to be 10 to 15 miles.
Well, you got a road bike?
I do.
What kind?
It's a Trek. It's an electric.
Oh.
It gives me a boost up the hill.
Yeah.
You're still having to pedal like crazy, but it gives you a boost up the hill.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
I was riding one Saturday morning with these real fast guys, and we were going up a river road, and I was getting gassed. And he come up beside me, and all he did was put his finger on my back, and it felt like I had a jet fuel. It just, that little bit of help was a big deal.
Yeah.
And it wasn't psychological, it was a help.
Well, I will tell you that, for somebody my age or older, I think an electric bike is something to look into. There's nothing to be ashamed of to say you need a little help when you're going up those steep.
I ride with this guy that he's 72, and he can outride me. And he recently got a tattoo on his calf. And you got to admire somebody like that.
Yeah. You're only as old as you feel. And that's an oversimplification, but as long as you're thinking young and you're going and whatever else, you can do a lot of things. I mean, when I was a kid, someone my age was expected to just sit in the chair all day or be in the bed. That's just, what the culture was.
Do you think it's mental?
Oh, yeah. I think if you sit down and you're not using your brain and whatever else, you're going to go downhill.
But do you think pains and aches are kind of, can you push it out of your mind?
Until the next morning, and then I got to have that ibuprofen.
Which is fine, right?
Yeah.
Just take an ibuprofen.
Yeah. I mean, God gave us aspirin and all. We ought to use it.
Yeah. You can take stuff besides ibuprofen.
Oh, yeah.
That'll help to take some of that. It's all it is swelling, inflammation. That's all it is.
Just reduce that.
Just reduces it. Water helps. Stay hydrated. A little salt. Usually if you're feeling a little aches, you're not really getting enough salt.
Yeah. So it's interesting.
But do you think it's mental or not? How much of it is mental?
The pain?
No, I mean just staying active.
Oh, I think that you've got to some morning say, by golly, I'm going to get up and go.
Because there's some people your age that are literally not doing nothing.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know, I'm not around them much, so.
They're no fun, are they?
They're no fun.
I saw you the other day with Tom Wheeler.
Mm-hmm.
Is he an old friend or what?
We've become friends since I moved back. We've traveled some. Vicki and Jane and Tom and I've done some traveling together. And he's a big biker, although he and I haven't ridden together.
Doesn't he live out that way, sort of where he's off of George, like going to Birchwood?
Yeah, he's out in Mountain Point.
Oh, okay. He might have moved closer in because he used to live out at Georgetown, I think.
But
I saw y'all at that ballroom dance thing.
Right.
My wife takes ballroom dancing. What are y'all's connection there?
Well, we've just been supporters of the museum center.
Oh, so it's just supporting that, and that event was there.
Right.
My wife enjoys that ballroom dancing.
That's great.
That's
good, and that's good exercise. Anybody that
if you don't think that's exercise, you ought to. And I couldn't do all that stuff.
Yeah, and that'll keep you young.
You gotta stay moving.
Yeah.
If you're gonna fall forward, right?
Oh yeah. Do a good job of it. Don't do it halfway.
That's right. Rufus, I appreciate it, buddy.
Dee?
I know you got to get to your thing.
Been great.